Welcome to the Pathfinder Legacy Podcast, where we help farmers, ranchers, and business owners create a seamless transition plan for the future. From retirement to ownership transfer, we protect what you've built and guide you every step of the way.
Hello, welcome back to the Pathfinder Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, Heidi Olson, and today I have a special guest that I'm sitting down with, Mr. Pete Hanebutt, that we've known in our family for, I would say, well over 10 years. And Pete's got a couple of interesting stories to share with us today, so I thought it would be great to sit down and have that conversation with him. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, very good to be here, sitting down with you, having this conversation today. Why don't you give our listeners a little bit more of a background on you, where you hail from, and a little bit of your history?
Yeah. Well, I'm originally from Indiana. My dad was a county extension agent. My mom was a school teacher. We had a little hobby farm in addition to the things they did. So I grew up there. Mostly the family roots are southern Indiana, although my mom's from Michigan. They met in college and all that. And I went to Purdue. All of us went to Purdue in our family. And just out of college, I started with Indiana Farm Bureau and eventually was a lobbyist for them and did political education, candidate training, and servicing for Indiana Farm Bureau. About 13 years ago, the CEO here in North Dakota and I were at a conference together, and we started talking. I shouldn't say he made me an offer. We started talking about whether I would be interested in moving to North Dakota. And my only real hobbies are bird hunting and, doing things with family. And other than church, that's about all I do for hobbies. And this is a great state for that. And I told Jeff, I'd certainly be interested. I don't know that my wife, Diane, would be interested because most of her family was down there and all. But as it worked out, he did make us an offer we couldn't refuse. So we moved to North Dakota. I guess it's 13 years ago now, maybe going on 14. I can't really remember. And so I finished out my Farm Bureau career here, and I'm recently retired. And so the boys and I still live in New Salem, where we settled. And this is home now. And right. We're dedicated North Dakotans, and we're not going back. All right.
You're not even letting our winter weather storm that we're having right now scare you.
Can't scare me with that. I enjoy killing bugs every day.
There we go. All right. Especially those big old mosquitoes that we get here. Yeah. So back up a few steps, maybe I should say a few years, to when you were growing up. Talk a little bit about that, what your family history was like growing up and your siblings.
Yeah. Well, like I say, we're from Indiana. My mom and dad, there were 5 of us kids. I'm the youngest. The youngest girl is definitely the baby of the family, and I was the youngest child. I think I was the accident and she was the youngest child. But at any rate, so I have a oldest brother who lives in Delaware and has ever since he got out of vet school, basically. Another brother that's still in our hometown. And then I had a sister that lived in Michigan. She's passed away. And then I have a sister in Ohio. So between us 5 kids, we're spread out all over the country. It's interesting to, my grandparents, mom's parents came over from Germany as young people, and dad's grandparents all came over. And so I guess we've been in this country, at least the Hanebutts and the Hanebutts have been here since right after the Civil War on my side of the family. There are some others that came before the Civil War, after the German rebellions and revolutions in the 1840s. Some of the family came after that. But since, 1800s, our family's been in this country, and in mom's family just before World War I. And so we haven't been here multiple generations, but a few.
Okay. So predominantly German.
All German. And different parts of Germany. Mom's family was East Prussian, and dad's family, they were all Hanoverians. And so they do have different cultures and different kinds of food and that kind of stuff, but they're all Germans in my family. We haven't deviated from that yet.
Okay. So what's one of your favorite memories that you've had growing up with your family? Probably a handful of them that come to mind, but what's something that really set the foundation to form who you are today?
I think church was a big thing for us, and the other one would have been just being ag kids and 4-H and that kind of stuff. I am certain my oldest brother is a veterinarian now because we lost a lamb when he was a kid, and he never wanted to have an animal die on him ever again. And I'm sure that's why he's a veterinarian. But the 4-H things meant a lot to all of us. We all showed horses, and some of us showed calves, and we all showed hogs. That was just part of our lives between 4-H and rural life that a lot of kids have in rural America. And then our church, that was about what we had besides things at church and school that were like choir oriented or band oriented and all that. We were active in all that. And, we were athletes. I wouldn't say any of us were gifted athletes, but we all did sports and things like that too. But some of my best memories are just big family events in Southern Indiana, spending time with extended family, second cousins and cousins, my dad's generation, their cousins. That was a big thing that we would get together with them. All that German food, which it's not easy to stay skinny when you're eating all that German food.
And they're going to make sure that you're staying healthy and warm for the winter.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of warmth in that family. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite childhood memory from that time getting together with your cousins? It's something that you guys would do. Would you play games, or what would you guys do when you would get together?
I think the thing that I remember the most is we'd go to Aunt Irene's house and we'd have the big family meal for like Thanksgiving or Christmas. And whether we would go before the meal or after the meal, when we were done at her house in town with the meal, then we'd go out to the farm and we'd go quail hunting or rabbit hunting or whatever those kinds of things were. And so those were great memories for us that we would go hunting. And maybe we'd get down there the night before and we'd go coon hunting at night and then get up the next morning and do the family meal thing and then go quail hunting in the afternoon. All my siblings and the shotguns and maybe a dog or two. So yeah, those kinds of things were really, really fun to do.
And when you guys were out hunting, you had that family time together. So that's a big thing that you do. So did you, working on the farm too, did you guys also have livestock that you would work together?
A lot of that. My one sister didn't do so much with the livestock, and we are also 10 years apart from top to bottom. And so by the time my oldest brothers were in college, I was like the kid that had to stay home and do the work, bale of hay and whatever else, And so, yeah, a lot of put up hay, a little bit of pig work and a little bit of work with the cattle, not much. But my dad's hobby was mostly the horses. And so, yeah, some of those early memories of working with the horses, that was his hobby, those were very impactful. And sometimes, you learned an awful lot of interesting lessons. My dad went to Maine and bought this mare because of her bloodlines, and he had one foal on the ground and she got struck by lightning. And it's like something that you can't ever plan for, but it changed the trajectory of the horses he was raising and all that. So things like that happen along the way.
Right.
So, but as a little kid, to see this horse had been struck by lightning, and it's like, she was stiff as a board and she still had the unchewed grass in her mouth because she just died, the drop of a hat. It's just something that you don't expect to see.
And those things that growing up on farm have started to build and shape you for where you are today, and really mold you to prepare you for what you were going to see as an adult and so on.
I mean, my ag background, not since Dad was the extension agent, we didn't make a living farming, but he exposed us to all those things that were around agriculture, whether it's crop production agriculture or livestock agriculture. Granted, we didn't have poultry, but we had all the other kinds at one time or another of livestock. We didn't milk cows, but his family had. And so we were around some dairies as well. But I started off in college thinking I was going to be an ag ed teacher. And I didn't like that so much in college. And it was really easy for me to run home to animal science because that was my first love and the thing that I had done a lot. And so the animal science background, I was actually technically an animal agribusiness major and a meat science major. That definitely molded me. All those 4-H things and all that, being an Aggie kid is what kind of pushed me in the direction that I went in college. And along the way, I started this bug of being interested in public policy type things. And that started with a couple classes at Purdue. And it veered me away from making a living in animal science and directed me toward making a living in ag policy. But that science background was so important because when someone is giving testimony that it's not sound science based, and you can say, well, that's not exactly accurate because that, there's a scientific method to things in proving a fact. That background really was helpful as a lobbyist. It gave me practical knowledge of a lot of things. And so as a lobbyist, it's a lot of being a lobbyist is the relationships you build with legislators and other folks. But having that science background from Purdue really helped a lot.
Okay. So then moving on, when you were in college, you did the animal science, agribusiness degree. And then when you finished, what was one of the first jobs that you had?
First job I had out of college was working for the Indiana Farm Bureau.
Okay.
I was the field rep for them in the northwest part of Indiana. And when they made me the offer, there were two positions open. There was Southwest Indiana or Southeast Indiana and Northwest Indiana. Southeast would have been kind of good. It wasn't exactly where my dad's family was from, but it did happen. That was the corner of the state where my dad had been an extension agent when I was born, down there in that part of the state. But I was dating a young lady named Diane Campolatara, and Diane's family was from south of Chicago and south of Lake Michigan in Northwest Indiana. And when they said, you can have your choice of going Northwest or Southeast, I said, well, put me up Northwest because this young Italian girl I'm dating, that's where her family's from, and it'll make it more convenient for her to come visit me if I'm living up there. And so I chose the district in Northwest Indiana because of Diane, and that was definitely a different part of the country. I'd been to Northern Indiana, but Northern Indiana is, if you haven't been there, a lot of flat, black prairie ground like we think of in eastern North Dakota, highly glaciated, really good soil and all that, where Southern Indiana's rolling hills of clay. And so completely different north and south of the glacier line. Well, I hadn't spent a whole lot of time up in that area where it's almost all just corn and soybeans and a few other things. That was a different experience for me going to Northwest Indiana. So That was my first postgraduate job.
Your first professional job, graduating from college and doing that, and then courting a young lady at the same time, and you getting your feet wet, getting your feet in the door with Farm Bureau, and then you and Diane eventually.
Finally, she begged me to marry her after all these years of dating, and we were married. It was 1997, November 14th, for all you guys that don't remember our anniversary. November the 14th of 97. And by that time, I had worked in the field for a while with Farm Bureau, but I had moved to the home office in Indianapolis to do the lobbying type stuff, the public policy type stuff. And coincidentally, Diane was in Indianapolis by then too. And so that's where we made our life together. My first 20 years in the Farm Bureau family were in Indianapolis mostly. And we were married. We had a house downtown, right in the shadow of downtown. Anybody that's ever been to Indiana for the National FFA or anything like that, we were right there in that area of town, downtown. Yeah, it was a nice little Victorian bungalow cottage we had in a regular residential neighborhood, old house, 100-year-old house there. And we, 100-some-year-old house. And we moved to North Dakota and we found this 100-and-some-year-old house in New Salem. And this is where we made home.
Okay. Yeah. So then you guys moved to New Salem, North Dakota. You found your dream home in New Salem, a beautiful Victorian style home as well that you guys have shown us lots of pictures on. We got the grand tour. We had a good German meal that you cooked for us this evening. It was very delicious. And then gave us the tour of your home, and very beautiful. A lot of work, blood, sweat, and tears that you guys have put into this all as a family together. And some of those family heirlooms and so forth that you've brought back from your state of Indiana. For one thing, you've got those things that are in the house that mean something to you and that you can keep carrying with you and to pass on those stories with your boys. My
boys know the story of a lot of our furniture, whether it's a pie safe cabinet or a bookshelf or a pump organ. My boys know the stories of each of those things, and they are family heirlooms. So a couple of the painting or the pictures that are in the living room, that's my dad and his sister in the early 19-teens, Family heirlooms are important to me. Not everybody does that, but everything has a story for me. And even the shotguns that I burnt out with are 100-year-old shotguns that I'm going to pass on to the boys, and they know the story behind each of them. And some of them are third-generation legacy shotguns, and we're going to keep them that way. So I'm a bit of a history buff, and so I lean toward that kind of stuff, and I know the history of a lot of things, around our lives. And my boys know those stories too now, and I hope they keep up with it and show their kids someday that those kinds of memories are important.
Has that been something that you've done with your boys since they were little? Have you always, from the first time you started taking them hunting or doing things in the house, remodeling and so forth, have you always started sharing those stories?
Absolutely. I mean, I learned to frame in carpentry because my dad was handy that way before World War II and after. He was a carpenter before he went to Purdue. And he knew all kinds of things, how to make buildings. And so every hog house or building that we had in our hometown in Indiana was something my dad built, and I helped him build those things. I learned how to frame up things, and a little bit of wiring, a lot of plumbing type stuff that I learned along the way. And when we remodeled our house in Indianapolis, Parker, the older boy, who's now 27, was just old enough to be helpful and not just hand you the hammer or the screwdriver. He could hold things and do some stuff. But when we moved here and started remodeling this house, of course, he was high school and older and needed a lot of help for this house with all of the things. And so both boys were old enough by then to be really helpful. The wiring in this house is mostly what Parker has done. And the plumbing and the plastering and the plaster lath work and wood refinishing and all that and brickwork, a lot of that Paul's done. So my boys are learning these generational things from me that I learned from my dad. And Dad would always tell me that his father was lousy mechanically, that he wasn't very good with that kind of stuff. And so he went out of his way to be better at it. And I think my brothers are both pretty handy that way too, stuff we picked up from Mom and Dad. But yeah, that's one of those things that I guess is inherent in some families, that you just learn to be handy with stuff, whether it's mechanical stuff. My one boy's very good with diesel mechanic type stuff, and the other one is not as good with that kind of stuff, but he's got other skills too that we just have learned along the way. And so I guess that's something we pass along.
Okay. Well, and you keep record of it too, because you had a book that you were showing us earlier of the before and after pictures of all the work. So you've already done a great job historically preserving that history and so forth. So then passing that on with your boys, and very neat. So then your oldest son had a friend join him tonight. He didn't scare him out that they don't want to continue to, be your, but I can definitely hear the tone of the history and the family heritage and so forth. So as you guys were working on this house, were there anything that speaks to mind that was really that turning point that the boys, okay, this is where they picked up the knack for who was going to help with what area?
It is kind of funny how they each have their own things that they're better at or enjoy. And Parker likes to do the electrical. He can watch a video, do the diagnostic type stuff, and do things like running the wires. And I would help him pull wires and everything, but he did most all of that work. And for whatever reason, he gravitated to that, where Paul was a lot more helpful with the plastering and the plumbing. Maybe it's just because I told him he was younger at the time and I told him what he was going to help me with. Maybe that's the case, but I wouldn't have any doubt that whenever either of them have stuff to work on in their own houses today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now, they're going to be pretty handy with it because they know how to do these kinds of things. And I think that's just something that we learn along the way. So,
right. Those good skills that we have to pass on to our children and our grandchildren.
Yeah.
So now you're retired now, and you've got, you and your wife, Diane, had lived here for, was it 13 years?
We were here 11 before she passed, yeah.
Okay, 11 years before Diane passed. And your wife, Diane, passed. And when did she pass away?
It was 3 years ago. She had a subarachnoid hematoma, which is a brain bleed at the top of her head. And she actually survived that and was doing pretty well. And then she had esophageal cancer that actually was the cause of her death. But it was that transition when our brain was working just perfectly and when it wasn't working perfectly that was really a change in our lives, I guess I'd say. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it was challenging, but no, it's part of life. You don't always get a rose garden. Sometimes life is different.
Right. It's just how you paint that for yourself and what you do with it, with that rose garden or the flower bed that you've been given.
Yeah.
So when Diane got sick and had her first battle, was she able to come home in the middle?
She did come home from the hospital. Yeah. Although she was there from the middle of October until just before Christmas. So it was a long time first in the intensive care and then in a different unit and then in a recovery therapy unit, and all that was in Fargo. And so I was out there. This is Paul's senior year in high school. And I was out there about 4 days a week, and I could go to our office there and do a little office work, and I could do work on my computer, but I was there at the hospital. Most days I would come home on Friday nights for Paul's football games and then stay for church on Sunday and then go back Sunday afternoon, and sometimes back and forth through the week. But she was there all that fall and then made it home just for Christmas. And we still had therapy and things to do. to help with her recovery to get through that next spring through Paul's high school graduation. And by that time, she was mostly physically functioning very, very well. The mental aspect of it was a little bit more challenging, but that was just part of it. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Because you were seeing, from that time when she came home until she had her diagnosis with the cancers,
Mm-hmm.
she was here to be with Paul and you guys as a family for his graduation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And her memory was still good at that time, maybe physically more challenging.
Physically, she was pretty good. It was a long time. I mean, she had to go through these protocols like someone who's had a stroke or an aneurysm or anything like that to make sure that you're functioning before they let her drive. She had to have her doctor sign off on that, which was a real pain because she seemed pretty normal, but the doctors kept giving us the runaround, whether it's this doctor or that doctor, who gets to sign off on whether she's can drive or we're going to be liable if she has a crash because her motor reflexes or whatever aren't as good. And some people just didn't even understand that, because she seemed fairly normal, but she could also, forget things and all that. And so it was a bit of a challenge. And anybody that's had a family member that's gone through a brain injury like that, doesn't matter if it's a physical injury like a conk on the head or a brain bleed like that, there are always challenges with that. And sometimes people have debilitating things like they can't use their left side or their right side. Diane didn't necessarily have any of that, but they gave us a book at the hospital there that said, these are things that you're likely to see. And it was really good for the family to have that. But these are things that you're likely to see in her recovery. And it was things like anxiety, things like paranoia, things like depression. And she had all those things. And we tried to work through it, and it was not easy. And it ended up being a challenge for us. And the other thing is what actually killed her, but it was the brain stuff that was agonizing for the boys. That it's like, what happened to my mom? Where's the woman that, was the salt of the earth a year ago? Mm-hmm. And now she's she's not the same person. And that's what families go through.
Right. But you persevered. And
most of the way, yeah.
And I mean, because I'm going to say the show must go on. Life still goes on.
Yeah.
And to figure out how you get through each and every day. So you got Paul graduated and on his way for his career and college and so forth. And then Diane got her second diagnosis with her cancer.
And then, it was more like 6 months of just decline from there on out. And that's a shame, but that was part of it, so.
Yeah. So it's never anything that we have a crystal ball that we can plan for or that we know it's going to be coming down the road. You have a strength in with your family and your faith and making sure that you kept everyone close by and your voice to keep them close.
Yeah, if it hadn't been for our foundation of faith, it would have been a real challenge for us. But when Diane would do things that were so abnormal for her personality, the boys just knew, that's not Mom, that's just what's happened to her brain. We have to get through this together kind of stuff. And that was a challenge, but it's part of it.
And they were adults. It never makes it any easier, but they weren't toddlers. They were adults. So they had a lot of good memories, photo books, whether it's, dialed back in their memories that they had or photo books that you guys have created and so forth. So they have that to go back.
Absolutely.
Back on. So then after Diane passed, you had mentioned that Diane didn't have a will. She didn't have a will. So you had some of those hurdles. You're grieving, you're taking care of your boys, you're managing the house, your career, and everything that goes with life. And then you find that there was no estate plan. So then you had to weed through that and figure out what needed to be done. Yeah,
we're lucky that, in North Dakota, the laws are such that we had everything in order as far as our names were shared on everything. Okay. All the loans, all the vehicles, all the house, all those kinds of things were all in both of our names. So I inherited everything naturally, which isn't any big deal. It might be different in some other states. But at least here we had that we had our names jointly on ownership of everything that mattered. And so that was fine. But there's still that weeding things through of just the simple stuff like her name was on, I can't remember which of the bills, but like her name on the maybe it was the electric bill and my name was on the cable bill or something like that. But just little things like that. First whole year, you're trying to weed through those kinds of things to make sure that you're not missing something, that you're not missing to, pay some simple thing. I had to go into the bank, and our banker, of course, knew us as a couple and everything, and talk to her about what's going on and how do we protect ourselves from these things when Diane's brain wasn't quite wired up right. How do we protect ourselves from somebody hustling her? And the bank was helpful with that kind of stuff. And we just made sure that nobody was cashing checks out of our account that I didn't know about, that kind of stuff. And I shared this story with you that I have a friend whose father had a stroke, and there was somebody in their town that was hustling him. And then the family found out about it, but after a few $1,000s had already been spent out of the farm checking account. And so, when you have someone who's had a brain injury, and certainly I'm no expert on that, I've lived through it, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert on it. When you've had someone who's had a brain injury, they're susceptible to being hustled in some ways. And there's ways to protect yourself from that. And I wish I'd have had, a few more ducks in a row with that. Ours, fortunately, wasn't as bad as some others. But those kinds of things can happen to families. When a member of the family business, quote unquote, has a brain injury, and there are things that could happen in the family business. We didn't have that as a business. Of course, we just had our family stuff. But in a farming situation where it's a family business, I could see where that would be a serious threat to everything about the family. You hear horror stories, and there's ways to get ahead of that.
Right. And it's more and more prominent now than what it was that we had to think about, 15, 20 years ago. Absolutely. Because we just didn't have it. And we didn't have the technology. So now you've got all of the additional concerns that you need to have and make sure that you're checking how everything is titled, from checking savings accounts, loans, as you mentioned, in addition to making sure that the bank is aware that there weren't any scammers that were hustling Diane, or people not only just hustling her, but there are oftentimes people that try to really befriend on the side too, and they have ill intentions.
Yeah. And there's some people, that think they're doing the right thing to be helpful, and they're doing absolutely the opposite. She needed to, do, as part of her recovery from the brain injury was to do certain things, exercise, walk, do all these kinds of things. And all it would take, and this didn't happen, but all it would take would be one person that says, "No, you don't have to do that. You seem normal to me." That would set you back as a family while you're trying to recover from something. And so, those kinds of things are really important. And the nuclear family, meaning the spouse and the children in that family, should be making all those decisions. It shouldn't be some crazy aunt from somewhere else,
right.
Which I guess could happen.
Right. Okay. Well, you bring up some good points and tips that our listeners need to be thinking about listening. We're getting to the end of our first part of our episode, and we're going to take a break here, and then we'll come back, and you guys will hear the second half next week. So in the meantime, if you want to connect with me, you can contact me at pathfinderlegacy.com. At the end of the day, if you don't have a business plan, or if you haven't done any planning, just know that now is really the time to make sure that you have a plan. So until next time, I'll see you between the ditches.
Thanks for listening to the Pathfinder Legacy Podcast, where your future is our focus. Be sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and visit us at pathfinderlegacy.com to start building your transition plan today.